So again, if anyone is just joining us, we are at V-A-C Zattere Palazzo in Venice, Italy, as part of the project Non-Extractive Architecture, curated by Space Caviar. And if you have any questions during the talk or afterwards, feel free to add them in the Q&A tab below, or raise your hand as the raise your hand feature. So we're really pleased today to have Mitchell here with us. Mitchell Joachim is a co-founder of Terreform ONE and an associate professor of practice at NYU. Formerly, he was an architect at the offices of Frank Gehry and IMPay. He has been awarded a Fulbright Scholarship and fellowships with TED, Moshe Safdie, and Martin Society for Sustainability, MIT. He was chosen by Wired Magazine for the SMART list and selected by Rolling Stone for the 100 people who are changing America. And many, many other very impressive notes that I won't go through your whole thing, but we're really pleased to have you here today and to share some of your work with us. So welcome, Mitchell. Thank you.
Thanks. Glad to sort of be there on some level. I would love to be in Venice. I am a German resident, so I'm born in the United States, but it's hard to get into Italy these days, and that just seems to be unacceptable. I can't wait till this pandemic is over. I hope everyone is, healthy and their families are okay. And this is a difficult time, but we're going to get through it. On that note, in this idea of sharing, I would love to show some of the work that we do here at Terraform ONE. And if I could, let me just share screen, and let's see if that goes through. And how does that look? Is that okay? Okay. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're essentially an urban think tank that speculates about the near future of our cities. Use Hurricane Sandy here in this image to talk about what's happening with climate weirding and the effects that it has on our urban infrastructure, and what architects, urban planners, urban designers, landscape architects, and anyone in real estate and development can do about it. I think that's really crucial. We work underneath this single kind of idea, which is fighting this wicked problem, and that's wildlife population is 50% less since the 1970s. That's every bird, fish, mammal, insect on this planet is dying, not just individually, but their entire species disappearing. So if you ever wanted a mission that had an extreme cause, this would be one of them. We can't accept these beautiful creatures going extinct, especially by the operations we perform as professionals every day. And we could do things about it. So this is not about doomsaying and a bunch of nasty statistics, but it's about how we can actually get out of this problem. John F. Kennedy said it best: if man created problems, man can solve problems. He'd probably say people today, but back then it's a different kind of language. So here's the white rhino. This creature has gone effectively extinct. You will never see another white rhino. One had been revived from the San Diego Zoo from a frozen embryo, but there's only two left, a mother and a daughter. They're called endlings. And many of the things we do in habitat, lack of habitat protection or preservation or pesticides or overdevelopment causes the extinction of species. Every 9 minutes, another species on this planet disappears forever. So this particular image here is looking at, how we do good in architecture and in urbanism. And it's essentially Asia, Europe, and America, the point systems that we put in place that allows us to make buildings greener. And this is everything from Active House to LEED, Energy Star, WELL certifications, etc. And if you tally up all the results, less than 5% of the points you get for doing good goes towards biodiversity, goes towards saving the flora and fauna that surround our development projects. That can't happen. In fact, if anything, it should be 90% of the points you get, or no incentive. It should be a must, just simply a kind of an automatic factor in any approach to any project. You can't wipe out a species to put in a Walmart or even a very nice museum, but we do all the time. So our single overriding predicate is design against extinction. That's what we do at Terreform ONE, and we think about that a lot. And we're trying to do that now in a project in Saudi Arabia and some other places. It's not easy to do, but that is the kind of the base premise for our mission. What are we fighting against? We're fighting against more and more humans. Urban population is a good thing, but just more of us and our lifestyles, how we live, how we work, how we move in cities, what the things we eat, affects the resources that are extracted on this planet. And we could be smarter about this. So we're looking at an increase of population from the United Nations that's around 11 billion people by the end of this century. It could be 9 billion. Either way, that number is almost unfathomable. And we need to think about the stuff that we eat and how we move in cities. For instance, the amount of food we're expected to consume, and this is a problem that is about architecture and urbanism, is expected to double the amount of meat by 2050. Also, the vehicles and the way streets are designed seems to be more congested than ever. There's more things on streets than you can ever imagine, from scooters to bicycles to different types of buses to rail systems. And it's a cacophony. It needs a sense of order. It needs to be predicated on ideas of energy optimization, or if anything, a net zero or a positive gain system for energy. So it's not about just being zero and doing nothing bad. It means actually contributing back to the grid and being accountable for the 100 years plus of industrial pollution from moving and traffic in cities. This kind of work is called socio-ecological design. So for those who are academic, that is the precise term. It recognizes that engineering and architecture design itself, we can absolutely author that. We can control those modalities. We have that sphere of influence and agency. What we do need to recognize is the social side. That is the capricious public, the leadership class, policy and regulations. These should be completely enmeshed in our design thinking always, if we're going to get to something that is actually ecological. One of our first projects is communicating ideas like this about extinction to the public. This was the first project I'm going to show. This was done for TED and the TED Countdown, which came from the United Nations, giving us about 7.5 years before permanent change in our temperature reaches around 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this was these eggs that we deployed throughout urban spaces and in other areas. These were some initial concepts that would have a rare species on the edge of life, on the edge of extinction, a threatened organism contained inside it. And it would slowly be released over the course of those 7 years. And the idea is that the public would be exposed to these eggs, and they would see that their entire habitat, these seed pods, all the kind of flora this creature would need, and then cryogenically preserved embryos of that threatened or near threatened species would be inside the egg. The system is made of mycelium, paraffin waxes. It's got a kind of a pollinating system on the exterior, so seeds are embedded into the shell, and the weather is meant to decay the egg over time till it eventually opens up and reveals the cryogenic chambers. All the seed pods come out, creating a local habitat to preserve something like a rare salamander. And then a technician opens up the fertilized eggs and allows that creature to repopulate or rewild that section of the city. So here is one of the eggs that we did. They're around 15 feet in height. They contain all the soils and medium it needs for the habitat. And they're meant to be deployed in public areas, so it can explain to folks that there's a creature in your neighborhood that's going extinct right now. And we need to do something about that. On other themes about pods and eggs, which we are fascinated with, this is called the urban farm pod, or the plug-in ecology. And this is about food systems in our cities. And here we use a rotegrity sphere that is robotically milled. It comes flat packed, and the geometry could be almost any size from 4 feet to 18 feet in diameter. And the thought is, instead of a green wall, it's a green ball. And here you can grow your food not only on the outside, but also on the inside. And you want to go from pasture to plate with the sense of immediacy and a clear understanding of where your food comes from. And you want foods that are logical, that have a high yield, that could not be grown in cornfields or wheat fields someplace in Iowa, but someplace you want to have fresh and local and ready to put into your salad. That makes sense to have these food systems in your environment. So here's the rotigrity sphere. It's got, I think, 64 different planters that are double skin planters with a wick irrigation system. There's 9 columns of irrigation that trickle feeds those planters, and they're placed into these pleated membranes that hold the pots, and you can grow anything inside it, from wheatgrass to arugula to spirulina, to foods you want to have fresh and immediate. We also do cellular agronomy. Those are the test tubes. So it's making foods from cells as opposed to saplings or seeds. So test tube farming is a big thing. The inside can also grow your food, or you can use it as a piece of furniture or a cabin. So you can be at one with your farm. But the thought is that you can grow different types depending on the lighting conditions. There are grow lights on the interior and the exterior. All of them can be monitored with an app, and you produce your food, and that's ready to eat. That's another view of the farm pod. It also turns, spins on a dime, and gets the most amount of solar income. So if it's not other food pods or systems to preserve cryogenically missing species, we look at biotech in architecture. We're probably one of the first groups, if not the first group to do that. We started GenSpace, which is now Biotech Without Borders. And this has led to other organizations such as Biofabricate and others, but we built our first fully functional wet laboratory. And we did that in our space at the Metropolitan Exchange. There we worked with scientists. My roommate at school, Oliver Medvedik, was our chief scientist and teamed up with Terraform. We created bioprinters. So here's one of the first DIY bioprinters, where essentially the entire project is in the syringe. It's a sanitary, hygienic syringe system that prints cells into a specified geometry. The architects give the geometry, the biologists specify the material and the cell structure, and we print things into shapes. This came out of a paper from Harvard Medical School in regenerative medicine, but we were looking at modified inkjet printers with different cartridges and extracellular matrix from pigs to print essentially simple organs. And these organs are normally used for patients who have cancer. And this is a bladder that's made from pig cells that gets replaced in their body. The thing about it is that it's actually victimless. So no sentient creature is harmed. And it turns into essentially a leather that's made from these immortal cell lines that's folded up onto a scaffolding. So we provide the geometry, then get the cell structure in place, and we produce these simple organs. One thought is, could you make a large-scale architecture out of this? And the answer is yeah. So there's a comparison between a typical stud wall construction you find in any suburban house and our meat tectonics project, which is made from pig cells. Here we use fatty tissue for insulation, cilia to deal with lateral forces and wind loads, sphincter muscles for doors and windows, because what would be the shape of an architecture that's made from printed cellular systems? And we got these various forms of super ugly houses that we eventually printed in section. So this is a home made out of pig cells that's curated for various sulfates and nitrates into a leather. You can make handbags, belts, shoes, whatever you can imagine in industrial design by printing the cells into a shape. It is now a company called Modern Meadow that does just that. They're making clothing, leather printed from cells where the geometry is predetermined. That's Suzanne Lee. She's right next door to us at Terraform. And we made these shapes early on, which is essentially these printed leather systems. It does not need to stay alive. It has no immunological system, no capillary activity, no skeletal system. It is just flesh printed into a precise geometry. We had fun with it. We thought that the house of meat, we call it the in vitro meat habitat, could be placed in front of a cathedral so religion can confront printed meat. We'll see how that works out. But we had a lot of fun producing this as a propaganda piece. We don't necessarily mean to make houses out of printed or grown leather. We know there's issues with that. But we wanted to push the boundaries of this technology, and we did this now a decade ago. And there's many more people in biotech, probably because of that and our promotion of this project. So here's our Terreform ONE labs in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We got a grant from Governor Cuomo along with DBI, David Belt's group, to take these buildings and convert them into a space for making and productivity. It is the first maker village of its kind, not a maker space, but a village filled with people doing waste, food, water, energy, air quality, mobility projects, and projects predicated around equity. So we had these buildings. The new lab building that we're in is the one that's in the foreground. It is this place where you have access to all types of machines that you share with different companies in this synergistic environment. It's similar to the MIT Media Lab, except for there you get a bad grade. Here, you don't get a bad grade. You lose all your money, lose your parents' money, all of your investors, and you're out on the street if you can't make your project or invention work. So it's a membership system. We got at our peak, we had about 100 different companies here. With COVID, we lost a lot of folks, but we expect that to come online. But we have all types of robotic mills, CNC, lathes, 3D printers, sewing machines, thermoformers. We've got a fully functional wet laboratory for biological work, material library. All of that happens inside this project that took us 7 years to make. Terraform is one of many groups, but Terraform is a founding member company of this laboratory. It's quite an inspiring place to work, and we are the only architecture group and the only nonprofit in this lab of people actually designing and building the future. So everything here from new types of electric bikes to different pieces of medical equipment to a number of rocket scientists to folks doing nanotechnology, they're all in this space. So this is our Terraform workshop. We're very much like an open garage. So we build things and test things on the fly in an interdisciplinary fashion. We don't really have any specific way of doing things the same way. We just reinvent our method every time, depending on the project and the challenge before us. So this is some of the things we've been tackling over the years. It's ideas about how we move and how we eat and how we live in cities. And this started early on before Terraform. This was thinking about movement systems in cities. This is my work at the MIT Media Lab doing my doctorates, but this is called the Hug and Kiss Lamb car. It's a car that's based on biomorphic movement patterns. It's called gentle congestion. These cars move in flocks and herds of vehicles. The drivetrain, suspension, motoring, everything's inside the wheel, including a modicum of intelligence. You don't actually drive, even though it's a drive-by-wire system. You read your book and you move in these flocks and herds. And it's designed to be scuffable. It's designed to hit other cars. That's kind of the point. It's not a precious, shiny metal box that says, don't touch me, don't scuff me, but instead we accept the fact that the material of the vehicle needs to be changed. Its base architecture for pretty much all automobiles has been sheet metal since Henry Ford, and that doesn't quite work. So we expect cities to get denser. We don't need to go faster than 30 miles an hour because that's the speed limit in New York, Paris, Shanghai, more or less. But these are cars that move in these flocks and herds that occasionally rub up against one another, and that's fine. You look out the window and you say ciao when you hit someone. It's okay. It's made out of ETFE foil, different types of air bladders. There's a lot of ways of producing scuffable vehicles, including a lot of great designs from sneaker companies that produce the envelope, because the vehicle is essentially in the wheel. This is the car that we productized. It took 14 years. It's called the Heroku, but it's a car that is designed to fit cities, not the entire 20th century designed around the automobile, but it's a vehicle designed specifically to move in a dense urban environment. So here, the wheels, which look funny, are actually omnidirectional. So it spins on a dime. The frame or the chassis of the car stands up because we recognize that it's not about moving or performance. It's about parking and storage. Vehicles in cities, their major problem is where do you put them all? So this is a shared ownership model like Zipcar, like Uber, like Lyft. But the idea is that when it's not in use, the frame stands up and the next one connects into it. You can park 3 or 4 of these in the same spot you can park a single SUV, which is a much different way of looking at vehicle design. And then we bring that out to the urban design scale, which is imagine the entire cityscape altered to be something that is socio-ecological. So here we translate 42nd Street. We get rid of a lot of the cars, replace it with high throughput transportation from trackless trains, just essentially autonomous articulated buses. We then look at the core infrastructure, lighting systems, et cetera, that are now supplied by independent battery packs, photovoltaics, and vertical axis wind turbines. And then everywhere we can, the facades of buildings are productive green spaces, either for air quality or vertical farms for food. And then the groundscape is a grand civic space that's meant for people to occupy streets, not for cars. Here we have a riparian corridor in the center, teeming with all types of life forms. And then people get to walk, because walking is the best way to engage a city. Then we imagine there's some modicum of automation to do all the maintenance on these things. So how that happens, we're not quite sure, but there's lots of ways of thinking about future automation for maintenance. So if it's not at the city scale, it might be thinking of a global scale of cities. So this is another project we did that's in bioengineering and looks at all the world's cities as one single contiguous model. This one specifically is a model of Istanbul, both the existing population condition and then the growth of that population. And the question here is, can we create a map of the world where all cities are combined as one, and that they are made from a living organism, and it reflects the growth of humans at a one-to-one. So in this case, the living organism was genetically modified transgenic E. coli. The E. coli population count was identical to the human population count of those cities. Then we predicted the growth and the expansion based on the E. coli growing through the dilution method, based on humans and how they would grow towards the end of the century. So we had to learn to draw and map with E. coli along with their population and colony density. We created these basic analog computers with E. coli, and then CAD files served as base mapping and stencil systems inside these alluvium petri dishes. These plates were filled with food that would service the E. coli and count the specific amounts of populations and their predicted growth rates. We took the 50 densest cities on the planet and we mapped them one-to-one with E. coli colonies. We had them grow on this massive map of the world where they grow at the same time, showing human population changing over the century. We have these 500-time USB microscopes that are on top of the petri dishes to show the growth rate of the E. coli from existing population to expanded. And then on the other side of the map is a parametric model that we had made with thermoforming that shows the different growth rates projected by the end of the century. So the high mountainous peaks is where you're going to see most amount of humans on this planet. Actually, most people will be living in Asia, predictably in the future. And then the dark areas are shrinking cities or zones in parts of Europe and North America where we're seeing less and less population over the course of the century changing. And we also do other things about urban metabolism and things that happen in cities. This project is counting waste, specifically in New York. The amount of waste we produce in New York is 36,000 tons of trash per day. What does that look like? How do we explain that to the average person that all New York does is technically make trash? That's compacted inorganic and organic waste. We used to go to the Fresh Kills landfill. We now ship it to Cleveland, but we've got to stop making nothing but waste. So this is a project called the 1 Hour Tower. It shows that we make in 1 hour more physical waste than the actual volume of the Statue of Liberty. And in a 24-hour period, not a 1 hour period, in 24 hours, we make a Chrysler building, a 56-story tower every single day in the city of New York. That's out of just the waste we throw out. So it's somewhere between 5 pounds of garbage per person in a day, in a given day. So what do we do about that? Well, one of the worst waste forms that we found is styrofoam. Styrofoam is horrible in Europe. Styrofoam is horrible in the United States. It is impossible to recycle with any level of efficiency. It's made of different types of VOCs and polymers that are not good for the environment. It's not cost effective to pick it up. It takes too much carbon to get it out of the system, and we basically throw it out. It ends up in our oceans or landfills. It takes 500 years for it to disappear. We looked at this paper out of Stanford that shows that mealworms eat styrofoam. They digest it naturally. They process it through their gut metabolism. They turn it into essentially something called frass. They then eat their own frass, and what you're left with is a garden mulch. The worms naturally, over time, degrade styrofoam. So here we are feeding them styrofoam for the Shenzhen Biennale. They degrade styrofoam in about 7 worms take about 7 days for a 1 inch by 1 inch solid cube, and the styrofoam goes away. And the worms turn into beetles. The beetles are eaten by birds and other insects. They help jumpstart biodiversity in the area. And the styrofoam then, or the mulch, is used for your garden. So we made these digesters. They're called biodigesters that combine a clock element that shows different time constraints for digesting different types of materials, such as 500 years for styrofoam, or 1,000,000+ years for different types of plastics. And we allow the public to throw their styrofoam inside these digesters and watch the styrofoam get eaten by hundreds of thousands of mealworms. It's kind of fun. It's a little gross, but it's kind of exciting. So we did this project for Camden, New Jersey. We're funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we made a massive farm for mealworms, the creation of mealworms, and a digester and clock system so that the public can come, dump their styrofoam in the head of this mealworm and watch it get devoured by all these little creatures. And on the top, we have different time sequences of different materials and how long it takes them to eventually degrade naturally in the environment versus getting eaten by this particular process here by the mealworms. And then all of the bins in the back are the farming system for the mealworms to grow more and more mealworms, because they basically have a lifespan, about 8 weeks, 2 months or so. And then they turn into those darkling beetles, which are eaten by the birds. So this is the installation in one of the largest dumping sites outside of Philadelphia. And it communicates to the public, we've got to stop illegal dumping. We got to rethink materials, and styrofoam is basically bad, but here's a way of degrading it organically. So this is the different worm farms and their surfaces that I'm showing here. It's another view of the clock, then the digester. It's called the bioinformatic digester, and showing it in its site. On the top is a oculus. So we allow sunlight, solar income to come through the top of the system, and it heats up the lower hypercube below and keeps the mealworms warm and happy, because they're creatures that like it. And then also, if we're not growing mealworms in our recycle bins, we use them to create areas for different types of weeds and plant growth that will also help jumpstart this very empty site in Camden, New Jersey. And that's the project from the other view. That's inside, looking at the digester cube, our 2080 aluminum system, which is infinitely recyclable material that was used to make this. And then another project is looking at other biomaterials that replace styrofoam. This is called mycelium, which is now in every architecture school on the planet. People are working with this. We pioneered it with Ecovative and Phil Ross, I want to say 14 years ago. But here we're combining mycelium, which is the root base of a mushroom, with another material called acetobacter, which is a bacteria-expressed cellulose that you can commonly get from sloughing off aged kombucha tea. We put them together to make a hydrophobic system, a novel biopolymer that's part mushroom, part kombucha tea. And we decided to make something that everyone can relate to. We were growing chairs in a lab. So instead of the 19th century version of a chair, which is a custom-made, bespoke, handcrafted artifact, where there's a relationship between the person who makes it and the actual final thing, we've got chairs that are grown in the 21st century in a wet lab. The 20th century, I'm also a big fan of. Thank you, Charles and Ray Eames. Thank you, Walter Gropius. These are unitized volumes made out of plastics and steel, and they're mass produced. But I think we need to make chairs that are mass produced but grown. When you're done with these chairs, you throw them into a garden and feed thousands of other forms of life. This is one of my daughters on top of a chair in her kindergarten that we grew, and she can eat this chair. So she told all the kids in her kindergarten, Daddy and friends make chairs that are edible. You can eat them like your crayons, you can eat your glue, and now you can eat your chairs. And that's okay, because they're completely compostable, completely biodegradable. We then made one at human scale, made out of a material called plyboo, a bamboo-based plywood. We used agricultural waste, so cotton husks, and then we aceted it with reishi. We acculturated it with reishi. The reishi eats the cotton, and after 7 days, it turns into mycelium, which is a dendritic root base that fits onto a triply curved structure. So when it comes to architecture, there's a lot of accuracy in how one of these things are produced. And we made essentially these benches that are all made from compostable organic materials. You throw into a garden and they just disappear. We've had these chairs now outside in full operation. We micro-manufactured them, and they've lasted for 8 years with almost little damage. And finally, just the last few projects. Here we're looking at growing homes. This has been a nonstop research endeavor. It's not easy to do, but we started off looking at a technology called pleaching, or grafting inoculate matter to form these one contiguous vascular systems, or basically growing woody plants into structures. I was on the PhD committee for this fine individual, Ferdinand Ludwig, who uses a similar system where he's grafting woody plants into, I guess, these towers. And he's doing it in a way where he just uses a simple screw and grafts the plants together by screwing them, and they naturally form, which is quite clever. So good for the Germans. And they move from root base to crown on these potting systems. We have the patent on that. We filed that many years ago with another individual, Ezekiel Golan out of Israel, when Terraform was first working with him to grow plants into shape geometries, including plants that grow vertically. Other systems like that you can find in Italy. There's a cathedral grown out of willows. There's this building, slightly different, the BIC building, or the BIQ building by Ove Arup, which uses algae in the facade. But the idea of what we call engineered living materials, ELMs, in buildings is becoming more and more real. The Wyss Institute at Harvard has named it one of the top 10 challenges for humanity in science is to think about ELMs. So engineered living materials is a big research topic, and the more we can think about how it fits into the built environment, the better. So these are homes made out of grafted trees, where there is no distinction between the landscape and the home itself. That is the concept here. So how do you grow them? Well, we've been looking at all different methods. So use a bioreactor. What's cool about this thing is we're teasing nature. So we're not genetically modifying it, but we're teasing an aspect of plant growth so it does something we want it to do. Essentially, the taproot of a plant, which grows very long until it hits soil and then spreads out dendritically to get the most amount of water, we don't ever allow it to get to soil. Instead, we tease it in a chamber that's dark and moist, and it keeps on searching and growing using all of its hormonal signature to create this taproot, but we never let it hit any kind of soil, at least till it gets around 3 meters in length. And we have this long, wet noodle from these dark chambers. We pull it out, we tap it in the soil, let it hit sunlight, it starts lignifying, and then leaf propagation begins, and we wrap it onto a scaffolding. That scaffolding could be any geometry that you predetermine. I think that's the clever part of essentially growing your stud wall system or your 2x4 system. So we've been growing these different bioreactor chambers to do it at different rates with different misting technology, UV lighting or grow light technology, etc. over the years. It is not a easy thing to do as far as research, but we've been getting it down to a system. These are more practical chambers where we have, this is a ficus plant that's grown inside a rectilinear form, and then we mist them and keep them in the dark chamber till they grow these very long roots. We're doing this in a house in upstate New York. And here, instead of spending all the effort of making our materials, we actually found a place that gives us willows already full grown. And that is an amazing change and a different juncture in our research. It turns out in Europe, mostly in Germany and Switzerland, we grow biomass. We use willows for biomass production. We grow them on a farm to a certain size, and then they're cut down, pelletized, and burned for a renewable fuel. And that's okay. But instead of it going from a woody plant to a fuel system, we actually want to go from woody plant to the construction industry. So here we're taking those very same willows meant to be burned, but we're using them to weave into scaffolding, CNC scaffolding, so that on day one, the building is fully grown. It's made of clusters of these willows that are pre-grafted. They're fit into a computer-driven scaffold, and they live for the next 100+ years. If any point on the grid these things start to die off, we just regrow a section of willow clusters. It's not single willows, but it's groupings of willows. They also attach to old growth trees for lateral force stability, etc., and to fit them into the context of the environment. But this is yet another version of this Fab Tree Hab project. We call this the Home Alive project. And here it's on a horse farm in upstate New York, where we have these cluster willows growing onto a triply curved geometry in this field condition in what I would say is a moderate climate. Does not have to be tropical. And the last two projects are looking at other ways of thinking about food in cities, and then getting right down to the core, Extinction. So this was our client for a number of years. It's a grasshopper. It's a cricket. And we worked with thousands of these guys. And the thought is to eat them. Why would you want to eat a bug? Well, the United Nations in 2013 has said that Europeans and Americans have got to stop eating all those cows, pigs, chicken, and lamb. If you can live off of insects, which is 80% of the planet eats bugs, we will save enormously on the amount of water and greenhouse gas emissions. It's 2,000 gallons less water to eat insect-based protein versus cow protein. It's also 300 times less greenhouse gas emissions. So in this study that we did at Terraform, we can bear two land masses of 100 acres each. The one on the left is cattle farming production and the same amount of protein versus 100 acres in a city growing crickets that we turn into a flower. So it's just an enormous amount of land use savings, as well as the greenhouse gas, as well as the water savings. You can do this inside cities. So we worked creating habitats for crickets to make them feel happy and satisfied. We had many different designs of those spaces. We produced this cricket shelter and farm, which is meant for crickets to live and thrive. They live about 6 weeks before they die naturally and are harvested. They're inside these bio containers, and they move throughout the shelter through these different circulatory tubes. Here you see them on the outside. We designed these dialogue gates that we also have a patent on, and different sacks and the scale of the sacks based on how fat and big and happy the crickets get. And once they're very old and fat and big and they die naturally, we harvest them and they're milled into a flour. We can make anything from bagels to pasta to bonbons. Actually, the best pasta I ever had was not in Italy. It was here in Brooklyn, made from cricket flour. So I'm sure the chefs in Italy will eventually get off of egg noodles and wheat, and they might think of using cricket flour. So there's something for Venice, maybe the next time I go. Here's a closer view of the different dialogue gates, the farming system, which is capable to be expanded. It works in urban areas. It's naturally ventilated, so we get vibrating columns of air that move throughout the colony and are exhausted through wind cowls at the top. The funny spiky things are what we call cricket horns. It's an instrument that picks up the sound of stratolation, which is crickets making chirping sounds because the males are horny. They're not worried about survival and they're looking to reproduce with females. When the crickets are chirping, it means that everybody is happy. We also produce these things called cricket sex pods. It's areas to help spread the genetic material of the crickets throughout the farm longitudinally. So it's essentially a place where the females and the males meet, they propagate and move throughout the shelter, and they're encouraged to do that in these areas. It is the only use for a Voronoi pattern I've ever found in architecture that is actually functional. As another view of our cricket shelter and farm. We feed them lime rinds, apple cores, orange peels. They love it. It changes the flavor of their gut metabolism. I will not eat an insect with hard legs and wings. That to me is disgusting, but I will eat a flower that came from apple cores or lime because the base flower tastes amazing. We work with Michelin rated chefs and we've made some amazing foods. You should check out Joseph Yoon and Brooklyn Bugs and a couple of other people that are chefs that cook this stuff. And it's amazing tasting. So the final project, and I know time is always limited, here is very much about extinction. This is called the Monarch Sanctuary. So here Terraform was asked to design a building, make it green. We said we don't really do that kind of work. There's a lot of other architects that do green building design, and we want to do much more. So we agreed with this group, this client, that we would actually save an organism from oblivion. We would save the monarch butterfly from disappearing from the United States. They are native to New York. They travel over generations from New York to essentially Mexico, where they reproduce and come back. And we've eradicated their habitat all along the American coastline. So one of the most beautiful insects that you can find. We've lost 90 million of them, according to the US Fish and Wildlife Service. They are not surviving. So here we designed a skin of a building that deals with the life cycle of these magnificent insects, looks at their caterpillar phase, their egg-laying phase, the eating and consumption of milkweed, their chrysalis phase, and then eventually it turning to beautiful adult butterflies. We fit that into the skin of the building so we don't lose any net usable area for the commercial spaces in it. We also have a patent on the system. It's called a biotope mosaic. But not only it's essentially terrariums that you plug into the edge of your building, either existing buildings or new ones. And it could house more than just butterflies. Almost any insect or small creature can be tuned to create these biotopes that fit into buildings. It helps increase biodiversity in cities. So it's a way of going to an urban environment and providing microhabitats that are scalable at cost, that fit together because they're modular, and then create habitats for other creatures. So we actually designed for them. This is a diagrid structure where you see the butterflies live inside that skin of the building in the interstitial space. They go up to a pollinator garden on the rooftop, an education center. They move throughout the atrium into the back courtyard and help rewild some of the local parks. It is a porous membrane so they can go in and out. So the butterflies are not kept in captivity and they live inside that building. So we had a number of grants to do this project, one from BASF, largest chemical company there is, and also another grant from Intel. We put these screens on the outside, OLED screens that show the drama of the butterflies from far away, because you can't really see, they're very small. So it's hard to tell in that neighborhood what's going on in that building. But in those projected screens, you could see what they do on a daily basis. Also makes it a very alive building, and it's not too expensive to put up some of these screens, actually. And we've been commissioned by the American Museum of Natural History to do all of their butterfly exhibition work, and then their new insectarium, which is opening up in 2 years from now, which is bees and ants and a whole bunch of other creatures that I don't have time to talk about. But actively in the American Museum of Natural History, we've dealt with butterfly feeders, how we feed butterflies, what they eat, their perch points, areas of respite, sleeping areas, fruit trays, all kinds of fun things. We experimented with El Segunda, painted ladies. We didn't use monarchs because they're rare. We worked at full scale, making large scale 3D prints and looked at ways of designing into those 3D prints different programmatic elements for the butterflies, such as nectar feeding areas, mud baths. Butterflies like to take mud baths, and other zones for different mosses and lichen and vines that are also part of the butterfly habitat. We used bamboo molds and a zero VOC product. Essentially, it's a medical grade resin to make molding systems for concrete. And the concrete, which I am not a strong fan of, but this is the greenest concrete you can get. It's called Green Sense, and we worked with the chemical engineers at BASF. It's impregnated with fly ash, so it's sequestering carbon. It's a very low embodied energy concrete that's fireproof and structural for 300 plus years. We then use those 3D printed molds to make the different components to fit in our final building. So we made a full-scale operational double skin facade with a vertical garden on the inside, all designed for butterflies, from mud baths to nectar feeding to perch points, etc. This was installed at the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt for the triennial, and then went to the other Smithsonian. Here we have live monarchs inside this 4-ton operational double skin facade system, and the butterflies live inside there. When you look out this window, you see a vertical garden in your office. So you just don't look out and see New York City taxis and street activity, but you see this garden teeming with life, increasing biodiversity in that area. We use different types of bioplastics for certain lash elements to control the butterflies. So we keep them in certain areas and direct them towards feeding zones, along with different types of UV lights. And those are actual monarchs inside the installation. Here it is in the Cooper Hewitt, with a number of the monarchs were in there enjoying the space, hanging out, propagating, hanging out in mud baths, eating, and eventually reproducing inside this space. And these areas here for different types of lichens and moss to grow there for air quality and keep the place heavily oxygenated. So that is some of the work that we do at Terraform. And I thank you guys for listening. And I certainly invite you to come here and see what we're doing at any particular point. Because we are a nonprofit, we're open, our doors are open. We don't really have much to hide. And why should we? So come by, we've got great coffee. We also have whiskey, we make that here. And you guys are welcome to it. So thanks for listening, and I can take any Q&A or any questions you guys might have. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Okay. So, I just want to say thank you so much. That was so interesting and really brilliant lecture. I think you definitely take this idea of like the green wall or living architecture to a whole nother level. It was incredibly interesting. Also, this idea of having animals as your clients and as the participants of your architecture, I think it's really exciting to see. And we also hope you can get over here to Italy and we can have some cricket pasta. I will try. I'm a bit skeptical, but I will try it.
Oh, no, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Okay, I believe you. Does anyone have questions from the group? I know Camilo, I see, has his hand up, but maybe we can put it first to you guys if you have any.
Hey Mitch, it's Joseph here. I'm in Milan, Camilo, so I just wanted to check in and say hi. Thanks for a fantastic lecture, lots of inspiration there. Is cricket pasta vegetarian rated? How does that work?
You would ask the hard question. Technically, nope, it's not vegetarian, but if you look at vegans and vegetarians, there is no way on this earth of growing plants at any large scale where you're not hurting or harming another organism. Just in the farming of plants, many animals, especially insects, are churned up in combines and in the process of harvesting the plants themselves. In some cases, small birds, different types of field voles, mice. So a lot of creatures live on farms, and even if you're just eating pure vegetables, the consequence is you're also eating a lot of other organisms. So like real vegans, if they're true to nature, actually you have to grow your own food and hand pick it and make sure that nothing on there, even small mites or any other organism, is on that particular plant when you're harvesting it. So I would make the argument that if we want to get to a greener society, and we should be flexitarians, and we should think about adding as a flexitarian insect-based protein to replace, the terrible conditions that we see in cattle production for farming pigs and chicken and lamb and cows. So I don't think it's for vegans, but I think we can take one for the team if we have to.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's a good question.
I guess on a more serious note, I guess it would be interesting to know, because I mean, obviously a lot of these projects have they exist somewhere between sort of serious scientific research and provocation, and so looking at it in terms of sort of scalability, I mean, do you imagine these projects as serious propositions for how cities of the future could actually operate, or do you intend them to be the kind of more a sort of a starting point to towards something that's might be considered a little bit more quote unquote reasonable? I'm kind of more attracted by the former, but
right. Well, we're kind of a double-edged sword on that. We like the provocation, but we also like the fact that we do need it to become a reality. And I think it should take a myriad of different forms. So it doesn't have to be these or these solutions, but the idea that architects get very serious about organisms, especially live ones, and take on that role and responsibility in their projects is almost a must. I think a big firm like a KPF or an SOM could really do some excellent work with something like this. But an upstart like us, like, we help prod the profession a little bit and push it forward. Maybe it's registering as something that's an outlier. That's okay. I think that we're adding in a voice that is not a part of architecture normally, which is all the other things that share the environments with us, and we certainly can do that. We have that capacity. And by no means do we claim any ownership to it. Nope. We want others to choose their own verse and take up this kind of torch and experiment on their own. I mean, it's an unbelievably vast territory in architecture that has honestly not many case studies. I mean, you can look at Milan, the Stefano Borani project, where he's got trees, in a skyscraper, and with like massive concrete and steel cantilevers to hold up potted plants. Now that's a much better start than not having anything growing around your building. But it's also a monoculture, and it's, what else is it doing? So we do need people to do that kind of work, and then we need people to push the boundaries and think of healthy, fertile habitats that are integrated into our cities everywhere. And that's a must. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it, but the more people that come online doing this kind of work, I think the merrier. And it's also, it's a lot of fun dealing with a client that doesn't speak your language whatsoever or care about billable hours. Just wants to live. So great question. Thanks for the invite, by the way.
Yeah, of course. I hope we'll cross paths again soon.
Absolutely.
I'll hand the word back to Venice.
Thank you. So are you guys good? Did I answer everything? Are we okay for the moment? Or is there more questions?
Luke looks like he wants to ask something.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know, I think it's something possibly slightly covered by what Joseph has been saying, and maybe I'm not quite sure the best way to phrase it. I think, I find it really fascinating, the idea of it seems like so much of the way that architecture conceives of its relationship to the environment is about minimizing the negatives and kind of thinking about the externalities and the kind of all of the things which are kind of out of sight, or which are sort of happening elsewhere. And I guess what I appreciate, this isn't really a question, but the thing which I sort of appreciate about this is making this kind of positive contribution the like centre of the project, and also making it extremely visible. I guess I'd be interested to know like how like the relative importance of like some of the projects seem to be about making things visible to people which they wouldn't otherwise be able to understand about kind of impacts and kind of like processes, and other ones seem to be about having like a very sort of specific, concrete, positive benefit in themselves. And I guess I'd sort of just be interested to know a bit about like how much you see the work that you do as being about about kind of that sort of interpretation, or that kind of like expanding people's understanding, and how much is it about like sort of concretely affecting things on the ground.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying. There's always clarity that that you want to have in your focus and your process. I think that's really important. As an architecture group, you really want to be cogent. And we're still in transition. Like there was very few precedents. And so the projects that you're seeing, I'm just sort of outlaying what we were thinking at the time. And they're spanning 15 years and over like 400 people that came in as researchers with different thought structures from different backgrounds and disciplines. It became, it's not really a linear process, and it's hard to prescribe a general way that we always approach a project. Now we're underneath this umbrella about designing against extinction, because it's a very activist stance, and it's one that has a sense of urgency and maps itself to other groups like Extinction Rebellion and the WWF and Greenpeace and Earth First and all these other organizations that we have a kinship with. Architects could do that too, but we are not going to block traffic on the street or paint our bodies with oil and shout at a bank. I think those people doing that are it's very valuable that that's happening, but architects, designers, we have a different approach. So our strategy has changed over the years, from communication about damage to the environment to informatic systems explaining data in a way that's not just plain graphs, but doing it visually and appealing to our visual acuity and letting people absorb facts by seeing different works and maquettes and follies that give structure to data about the environment, to actual implemented bits of science that doesn't really seem to have an application, or is just pure engineering and doesn't build in culture or desire or community. Sometimes science really leaves out those voids. And architects are amazing at creating narratives. We're amazing at getting the general physics of almost any idea. We use the power of our imagination to then communicate that to the rest of our society, because people are more worried about the economy, they're worried about their families, they're worried about, sports. They don't have time to necessarily think about some of these things. And even many architects don't have time to do this. So we've had many approaches over the years in our process and in our communication about what it is that we do. I think maybe, when I'm old and gray, I'll be able to look back and really say what it was all about. And hopefully, others will do that. To make a point to the previous generation, Peter Eisman, a former hero of mine, if not still a hero, he was complaining that the new generation didn't have a thesis. That deconstruction, Derrida, Foucault, like the thoughts about what deconstruction was under Schumi and Zaha and Gehry and all of these like amazing luminaries and aspirants in the field, and eventually it faded away. But he was complaining that the next generation was just more modernism and form making. And I don't want to name any names, but there's a lot of people out there that kind of have a heartless approach to shaping their architecture. But, you know, there is a new thesis out. I think it's in alignment with, you know, in this case, it's one in alignment with biotechnology and also other forms, computation and robotics, etc. So the tech side can be used for greater purposes. And then it's in alignment with environmental and sustainability issues, which is in the purview of our field. Like, that's how we are relevant to anybody in society. If you want to know what architects do that helps folks, it's that. We can do that. And there's many other variants. We're now seeing architects work on ethnicity issues and issues of racial injustice. That's happening more in the United States, but we can take on these more difficult topics. So I just find that, you know, I don't know what the ultimate sort of catch-all process is, but I do know that I got 2 kids, and the world they're going to inherit is, according to everyone, is a little bit dangerous. So if this pandemic didn't, you know, cut it as far as recognizing we're all one biology, the next big climate events will. So architects should be on the front lines of helping capture that narrative and working to plan it so we get to civilization 2.0.
Yeah, no, I think that's like a nice note to end things on, or not nice, but I would also like to say that we're going to be having a model of your work, of Terreform ONE's work, here on display. And what's been really nice about the discussions of organizing this shipment with Mitch is that he sort of suggested, hey, why do we ship it across from New York? Like, why don't you just print it in Italy? And I think this sort of made a big shift in the thinking for us, at least around the exhibition, which is something that we've been wanting to do with the exhibition in general, as you guys know, is that any material we bring into the space is then used. You know, the packaging, we're trying to only bring in used things to make the exhibition display systems. We're trying to limit whatever we bring into the space as much as possible. And so when you suggested this, I think that's really in line with the way that we're trying to form this exhibition. And I think in general, your work using technology in this way through modular design systems, through the use of robotics, it brings a sort of democratic field to the work that you're doing, where we're leaving a lot of labor from humans that could be exploitative, allowing for systems that can be recombined in many ways, that can be downloaded, that someone can make your cricket farm in their backyard. I think this is really exciting, and I think this will be apparent when we print your model here in our space. I think that is really connected to the thinking that we're doing here. So we really hope that you can come also to Europe and we can meet in person, but I also think this is an exciting opportunity. I think that this COVID situation has sort of presented to us is that, yeah, we can still meet, we can still have interesting conversations even from distances, and we can still share even models or architectures from distances by just downloading. So I think, thank you for this spirit that you brought to the project, because I think it's really a good one.
Thank you for saying that. We really love being participants in this initiative. We love showing our work. We're really glad to, if not honored, to be a part of the whole movement there, and really wish to be there in person. I will be there in the summer, and I'm sure everything will still be up and over there. And yes, sending a 200-kilogram crate, you know, over the ocean, you know, is crazy with the amount of carbon it creates. And you know, when we could just print something locally, granted, where printing does require energy, and yes, you know, there's always a give and take, but people love physical things, and it's important that you know, we continue messaging like that. That's why you want to go to a place to see those physical things. Yeah.
But yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the summer, and this space is going to be growing and growing, kind of like your structure. So hopefully next time you see it, you won't even recognize from the photos I can share with you or what you can see on the blog, but things are growing here as well. So
excellent, excellent. I love the floor pattern. It's nice.
Yes, the terrazzo.
Yeah, terrazzo.
It's also a form of recycling.
Yeah, a nice one, actually. Yeah.
Joseph, are you still there? No. Okay, well, ciao from us.
Ciao.
Thank
Thanks,
you
guys.
so much.
Take
Bye.
care. See you soon.